Okay, well, good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Dunkling, and I'll be hosting the discussion this evening. For your viewing pleasure, we have a list of locations where people are sitting this evening or the states that they reside in. Uh, so welcome to this evening's discussion. How many times have you heard a friend, neighbor, or patron ask the question, is the beer market today saturated? From the frequency this question is asked, at least in my experience, it appears to be a hot topic that's on many people's minds. Yet, is there truly reason for concern, or is this simply ill-founded skepticism? Tonight we'll explore this in some detail. I'll get us started by framing our discussion with some industry statistics, and then we'll move to two of our guests who will be joining us this evening. Sean Grigas is co-owner of Tomfoolery Brewing in Hamilton, New Jersey, and Garth Donald is founder and owner of Stormy Mountain Brewing in Chelan, Washington. I hope I pronounced that right. You'll have a chance, Garth, to correct me in a little bit. So we'll be using both audio and chat this evening for your questions. We'll give you instructions on how to do that in just a little while. So hold off on those questions until we go through some of the slides. Okay, so this data, a lot of this data comes from the Brewers Association, some of it from other sources. These slides in front of us now illustrate the growth in barrels produced over the last 8 years by different categories. On the far left is data from microbreweries, under 15,000 barrels per year. You can see from 2010 to 2018, a steady rise in the number of microbreweries. In the middle, sort of likewise, for brew pubs, increased numbers and I'll give you the actual numbers later, but the production levels have increased from 2010 to 2018 quite significantly. And then, as we've all read about in the last 4 or 5 years, production for regionals has slowed considerably, and the right-hand chart shows that demonstration of growth from 2010 to 2015, and then pretty much a flat line for many of the regional breweries since then. The numbers on the very bottom illustrate sort of the production volume by craft, import, U.S. non-craft, and then craft as a share on a dollar basis of the industry. So these numbers sort of illustrate the brewpub openings and closures. The darker bars represent the openings, and the bottom bars represent the closures. I'll present those numbers a little bit in just a minute, but you can see that in the last 3 years, brewpubs have had a steady increase, well, actually since 2010, but on the last 3 years, pretty stable number of increases in the number of openings. And as you can imagine, with increased numbers, there will be more closures. Microbrewery growth, likewise, a significant jump from 2010 to 2018. And the closures are the teal bars, certainly an increase over time, but as a ratio, still a significant number of openings for every closure. Here are the numbers from 16 through 18, and you can see that the overall numbers for craft microbreweries and brew pubs are over 3,000 during this period of time. We put together a chart to show sort of the ratios of openings and closures. This will be sent to you and supplied after tonight's session, but you can see what these ratios look like. Micros are more successful in terms of their ability to succeed over a period of time than brew pubs. but brew pubs, the ratios are still very positive, and when you can compare that to restaurants in general, these numbers are quite favorable. So let's take a look now at, we only listed the top 20 here just in terms of space, but these are usually represented by top 50 craft breweries in the US. These folks produce over 50% of all craft beer in the craft sector. So whatever these folks do influences these numbers quite significantly. You can see, if you have a microscope here, you can take a look at the 2018 numbers. They're all over the place. Some are up, some are down, some are flat. A lot are flat. Overall, the entire top 50 category is down over 3% over the last year. And there's been a trend in that direction for the last 3 years. So let's take a look at sort of the bigger picture here of the industry as a whole. Beer, spirits, wine, all competitors for alcoholic beverages, for the consumer purchasing power, and beer has been on a decline overall over a few years now. Wine is competing, spirits are competing, and we'll talk a little bit later about some other products that are competing with beer. So we're faced with some challenges as an industry in attracting more people into beer consumption. And hopefully this evening we can have some discussion about ways that might in fact happen. So how high can this go? We've seen this chart, many of us, dramatic increase from 2004 to 2018. The question I posed at the outset of is the market saturated is probably fueled to some extent by this incredible growth, particularly over the last decade. So the question is, can this continue, or are we going to see a leveling off, or as some predict, a crash in the craft beer sector? We took Bart Watson's analysis of the industry. He tracks beer with other industries such as coffee, and his assertion is, and you can argue whether this is accurate or not, that 10,000 population of 10,000 people can sustain a craft brewery. And so you multiply, if you have 100,000 population, you might have 10 or so craft breweries in that location. So we looked at, by US Census, the numbers on the left-hand side represent the number of municipalities that are this size. And I won't go through all of our assumptions here, but we projected that on the basis of that 10,000 per brewery analysis, that we could easily hit at a low end 11,500 craft breweries over the next period of time. Who knows whether that's 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And if you take it out to the extreme, you could be looking at 23,000 breweries in the US rather than the current 7,500 breweries. So that might come as a shock to some people, certainly that larger number, and it actually is kind of shocking. But certainly reaching the 11,500 mark is not too far a stretch from any imagination. I think to grow from 7,500 to 11,500 or even more, there must be a pipeline. And as we see from this chart, these are TTB numbers, government licenses for breweries that are in the planning stage. We're looking at a significant number from 2010 to 2018 of people who are considering opening a brewery. In the last few years, 5 years, we've had over 2,000 in this category. So keep in mind the number that we're at now of probably over 7,500 breweries. That gets us really close to 10,000 if all of them were to open. Of course, they won't. Some of them are in the planning stage and they will elect not to open. But it just suggests that the number of people coming into this category every year is very significant. We probably need to begin thinking about the industry a bit differently. Any of you who have traveled to Europe have found that in any municipality of any size, you have one or more breweries. So we might have to think about the European model rather than what we've experienced here in the US over the last 25 years. Pre-Prohibition America, none of us were lucky enough to have lived that long, or fortunate enough. So we don't have that knowledge, but during that period, every small town had a brewery. So we have to probably just think differently about the industry than recent past. So I'd like to open the floor to our two guests because they're actually in the trenches and they are experiencing the operation of a brewery in two communities, one in New Jersey and one in the state of Washington. And I would like to ask some questions about what their experience is and what their communities are like. So let me first go to Sean. Sean, tell us a little about Hamilton, New Jersey, and your surrounding area and who your customers are.
So Hamilton, New Jersey is midway between Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Atlantic City, New Jersey, two cities that some of you may know. Despite the size of Philadelphia, we're a short distance outside of there, but we are in a town with a population of only 15,000 people. And we're a little bit isolated east and west of our town. So it's kind of, you have our 15,000 and then you've got to travel a little ways until you get to another population. It's an interesting market where we're at. We actually have 3 breweries in our town with a 4th ready to open soon. So it's interesting, the number that you heard Greg say about 1 per 10,000, and I'll certainly address that tonight. When I speak, our customers are, the 3 breweries actually are very different from one another. We have a brewery that focuses on IPAs. One of the other breweries focuses on sours and IPA, and then Tomfoolery, we focus on a variety of beers. So we have varied clientele, between the 3 breweries, which kind of helps us sustain ourselves in a population of the size that we have.
Let me ask you about your surrounding areas. Do your customers drive in from half an hour away, and what does that population base look like if you were to draw a circle around that?
Yeah, you would include Philadelphia if you went out that far, and we do get people in from Philadelphia. We advertise in the Philadelphia market a little bit, and we get people coming in from Philly. We get a lot of people traveling back and forth to and from the New Jersey shore line. So in the summer, there's a lot of people on their way to or from that will stop in and grab some packaged goods or a growler.
Great. So let me just jump over to Garth and have him answer sort of the same question. Tell us about your community and what your customers, where do they come from? We're having a hard time hearing you, Garth. If you go up to the very top and hit the microphone and connect my audio, maybe that's the challenge here. There's a down arrow next to the microphone and it says connect my audio. Yeah, there's also a select microphone. All right, well, we'll keep working on getting you into the audio portion. We'll come back to you in just a few minutes. I'd like to open the floor to others who are here, and we saw from the very outset that there were people from across the country, or certainly represented different locations in the U.S. I'd like your perspective on your locations and what you're seeing in terms of the question of saturation, oversaturation, or is the market being served well by the number of breweries that you're seeing in your community, your region, however you want to define that. You may raise your hand at the very top to come in via audio, or if you'd prefer, you can put your comment in the chat area and we will respond to you in that way. If you want to use audio, just raise your hand at the very top. What? Hey, Brian, go ahead. You can use your mic. The microphone at the very top, you click on that and it should be green and you can go ahead and talk to us.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay.
We got you.
Just as far as sales, just in general, how much you seen that front door versus back door? Dealing with the 3-tier, and we want to try to maximize our profits. Obviously, selling through the front door is much nicer.
So you're talking about tap room sales and what people purchase in the tap room and walk out the door with versus what you're selling in off-premise?
Tap room growlers and that kind of thing versus out the back door and distribution.
Yeah. And where are you located?
I'm in Central California.
Yeah, okay. So, Sean, we're able to hear you. What is your experience in your market in terms of where you sell your product and to which customers?
So we sell mostly on premise. We do distribute. We're a small brewery. Most of ours goes through our tap room. The brewery that's pretty much directly across the street from us, they probably have similar tap room business that we do, but they also distribute a lot more. So they put a lot out the back door. So through the distributor. So, you know, it really depends on where you're located, what your market is, and really what you're interested in doing. If you're interested in a tap room model, it's certainly a very viable model. And I think, you know, to reach 12 or, you know, geez, 23,000 breweries, there's going to be a lot more tap room models and a lot less distribution models for sure.
Yeah, and Brian, talk a little bit about your location and what your competition looks like.
Actually, I'm in Central California, Visalia, which is halfway between Fresno and Bakersfield, San Joaquin Valley. I'm actually in the wine industry, but I'm interested.
Yeah, and so do you face, you know, in a 50-mile radius of where you're located, how many breweries are you competing with?
Right now, there's 6. It's
Okay.
There is potential based on the numbers.
Yeah.
And room for easily a 10K brewery locally. I got a population of 500,000 people.
California by number, of course, I mean, it's a large state geographically and population-wise, but it has the largest number of breweries in the U.S., I believe, by quite far. So depending on where you're located, you're going to be facing a lot of challenge to get your product on shelves or on tap handles. But you may also be, you know, as you describe, a location that's not as congested yet. I won't use the word saturated here, but you may find that there's still opportunity for a product on shelves and on restaurant and bar tap handles. And I think as Sean indicated, it all depends on where you're located. There's no blanket answer to this question of whether or not off-premise is still viable. A lot of people are certainly talking today about the tap tap room model, the more people you can get into your tap room and sell, retail price to, works to a great advantage. And we also hear lots of comments from distributors and from breweries that it's harder and harder to get a distributor to help them move product in other states or in other locations. They just have too many products. It's hard to get retail to put additional products on shelf. But you have to assess those situations in your local community for sure.
Thanks.
So Kevin says that Houston seems saturated with small breweries. What is your take on the taproom model? And I think, we've kind of addressed that. The other thing that Sean mentioned is differentiation. The Brewers Association talks a lot in the last year or two about the need for differentiating your products and your brewery and your brand. To simply offer the same thing that everybody else is offering down the street is probably not the best model. If you can differentiate in some way, and you have to answer the question how you want to. Is it by product? Is it by experience, taproom experience? The kind of venue that you're providing for people, whether it's music, dogs, kids, food, you name it, the different ways, the events that you organize to create a community environment for people that is perhaps missing otherwise. Sean, any further, what do you find in terms of beyond the product? You offer a wide spectrum of products. What do you do in terms of your customers to bring them through the door, other than the great beer that you make?
We do have events throughout the year. The typical beer drinking holidays bring people in. St. Patrick's Day, Oktoberfest is coming up. We work with our community as I think a lot of breweries across the country do as well. There are festivals in town, and we partake in beer gardens in some of those. Our town has a food truck festival, and that sort of gets our name out, and then people want to, they want to come to the actual brewery and then visit us.
Yeah. So Brendan says that the Portland area has about 20 and it's not saturated. Every time I've visited one of the tap rooms is full and people are buying. There's a lot of space between all the other towns to have other breweries, and they enjoy working with each other. Brendan, are you talking about Portland, Maine? Yeah, I was just there for 3 nights this past weekend, and indeed, incredible growth in the greater Portland area of the number of breweries, but I certainly couldn't make my way to all of them over a three day period. So I understand what you're talking about, and the products differentiate enough, at least the ones I visited. So absolutely. So Brian says, I'm in rural West Virginia town. The population of the county is around 16,000. Closest brewery is 1 hour away. So I think you're asking the question: is it viable to open a brewery in your location? Certainly, by the numbers, it would suggest you'd probably have to do a deep dive into understanding what your area needs and what they consume. What do they drink? Are they big beer drinkers, and is that pretty much what they want? Or is there a way to assess whether there's an opportunity for offering a diverse range of products? There's no right answer. Every part of the country has a sort of a different answer to that question. So you'd have to do some research to ascertain whether there's demand for craft products. Andrew, a question for Sean. Based on general population density, seems New Jersey actually has a lot of room to grow relative to the number of breweries in operation, even though when you look at the map, the state is pretty well covered. How do you think about the size of the craft brewery scene in New Jersey and room for growth?
So, very interesting observations you've made. All true. It's interesting in New Jersey that northern New Jersey is densely populated, but as you come south, there's a lot of rural areas, so that there aren't a whole lot of people. And since things move from west to east, right, California is progressive. It's we're kind of last. We do have over 100 breweries, and if you consider those in planning, there'll be over 150 soon. So we're covering the state, like you said, pretty well. I think looking at the size and the scene, I think there'll be more growth. I think it's gonna lead to the numbers. Numbers don't lie. The one for every 10,000 population, I think, is gonna. I mean, it's the truth. So I think depending on where the population is in Jersey, you're going to see more where there are more people, and I think we're going to sort of grow where there's almost one in each area in New Jersey now already, and I think we have a lot of room for growth in New Jersey. The other part that's kind of missing from your observation is state regulations and also local rules and regulations. The laws in your state have a lot to do with how much growth you're going to have as well. It's not simply population alone.
Yeah, good point. The question earlier about off-premise sales and distribution, it raises all sorts of questions about, are you going to self-distribute? A lot of breweries these days are starting in that way and then moving into an arrangement with a distributor as they demonstrate viability, and some states allow that and others don't. There are all kinds of strange regulations in states regarding the food service, on-premise, off-premise beer sales. So you really have to look carefully into all of the legal aspects to determine what's viable in your region. I wanted to just mention a friend of mine has a brewery in Beverly, Massachusetts, and he used to be a brewer at another larger brewery in Mass and decided that he wanted a community local brewery. So he opened one. It was open originally only 3 nights, and now it's open 4 or 5 nights a week. And then lo and behold, 3 years later, there are 2 other breweries in Beverly and 1 more in the planning stage. And when I asked him this past summer, what his feeling was about 4 breweries in a relatively small town, he had an interesting response, one that I didn't entirely anticipate. He said, I hope they're really good. And so a few of us said, pried a little bit and said, well, what do you mean by that? You want competition? And he said, there's a train station down the road, and there's a big city called Boston south of us. If these breweries are really good, there are going to be lots of people coming to this town and walking around to all of the breweries. So I don't worry about competition. I just want to make sure that people aren't turned off by any of the products that we're making here. So I think we see that. We see it in Miami. We see it in lots of different locations where breweries have really been successful in turning a street into a long street of several breweries. Or a number of breweries. Burlington, Vermont is a great example of that. People come here from Toronto and Boston and Philadelphia and New York just to beer vacation, beercation, I guess they call it. So it's sometimes to your advantage to have some competition that actually attracts customers. Seeing some other comments here. Kelly says, we're a nano brewery in the smallest municipality in the county in Pennsylvania, but we have a great location and people are connected to our story because our family has 2 sons on the autism spectrum. People connect with us because we not only talk about the beer we are brewing and make sure that we are brewing good beer, but we also make our brewery disability friendly. We are teaching and advocating as we are brewing and marketing. Great point at differentiating your experience for people and your values as a small brewery. Garth, you're back with us. Do we have audio now? Excellent. So tell us about your community and who your customers are.
Totally. So I'm located in Chelan, Washington. We are a tourist town primarily. We're 3 hours east of Seattle. As you know, Seattle's a big brewing hub, but we're out on the other side of the mountains, so we're isolated from that. There's a very small town in the off season. We're about 5,000 people total. And so a big bulk of our seasonal guest visitors usually coming from Seattle. They're on vacation, they're doing their timeshares, and they have, kind of tourist money to spend. But then, and we're dealing with it right now, when the season turns, then it all goes local, and you now have to deal with a market that's really just 5,000 people and maybe a few that'll drive from surrounding areas.
Competition?
Yeah, Wenatchee is the closest large town. It's 45 minutes away, and I've watched in the few years I've been doing this, I've seen them go from one brewery up to 5, and they're all built on the same street, and they're all built about 5 blocks away from each other. And it's been really beautiful watching that happen, and they've kind of called themselves Brewers Row. And it's where people can go in the town to go and visit it. I do have another small brewery a couple towns away, but for the most part, like, Chelan is the hub of tourism around here, and we're the only game in town.
That's a great situation. And what else do you have there in terms of restaurants and other amenities, assuming that you do, given that you're a tourist community?
Yeah, so we've got it's a lot of outdoor recreation is kind of the focus of what folks do around here. Our town has, by my count, 11 restaurants, and my brew pub has a pretty large restaurant attached to it as well. I do real quick want to go back to a point you had mentioned earlier, talking about kind of the rising tide floats all boats, and do we want competition and such? And I get this question a lot because people are always saying, oh, I heard another brewery's open, blah, blah, blah. Oh, how do you feel about that? And my answer is always, as long as I'm the only brewery in town, I'm going to be doing really well. But as soon as I get 2 or 3 other breweries in town, that's when we're doing great. That's when people are going to start thinking of the town as beer country, and they'll want to visit for beer.
Yeah. I get different mixed messages from the brewing community here in Vermont. Some are welcoming additionals and breweries, and others are a bit fearful of what that means. But Vermont has 650,000 people or so. We would never survive with our local consumption only. But beer tourism is huge here, and that's what drives the opportunity for so many breweries. And there are not many relative to how many are in other states. We only have something on the order of 65 breweries here, but we have some that are highly recognized across the country. People drive great distances for acquiring their products, and maybe they're beer traders, or maybe they just want to take products back to their friends in Chicago. But it's tourism that drives a good deal of the opportunity here. And those of you who live in locations where tourism is a factor, you have to make sure that is considered in terms of your business planning. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit here because there are lots of comments. I do want to mention that we have a Facebook page. We will continue the conversation over there. So if you want to jump over to the UVM Business of Craft Beer Facebook page, we will put that in the chat area for your reference. And it gives you an opportunity to continue this conversation, which we can't continue for too much longer this evening, but you all have some really interesting points here. Samantha says we have a brewery in rural Minnesota and just had another brewery open up near us, and we welcome them. And just like you said, because for us, tourism town, it's important to make it worth the trip and vacation. And we see that happening all across the country. And when you look at a map, if you were to take the time, and any of you who are in the process of thinking about a business plan, doing a feasibility study or business plan, you probably are doing this already, but you're taking a look at who's already operating and where, and mapping out where you see opportunities. 5 years ago, when we started planning this program, you could literally throw a dart at a wall map and open a brewery anywhere. Today, it's a little different. Some communities truly are reaching the point of no further need or demand for additional breweries. It might be a little bit of a zero-sum game in some communities, whereas a lot of people, I think, started with the premise that I will open a brewery in my home community. Now people are beginning to think, well, I'll open a brewery, but I may need to find the right community. And so doing that research ahead of time is really important, and it's part of your feasibility study. And often in businesses, location, location, location is the tenet of where you should locate. Not all businesses today with e-commerce care so much about location, but certainly breweries have to pay a whole lot of attention to that because they have to understand their consumers and the market that they're serving. So I wanted to unfortunately move to sort of a wrap up of this evening and encourage you to continue this on our Facebook page. But Joel Houston, I had the opportunity when we started this program to connect with a group out of Vancouver, Canada, First Key Consulting. They're a very large craft brewery consulting firm. They worked in big beer, most of them, and then they transitioned into the craft sector. They live all over North America, but they work for First Key. And they're everything from startup phase all the way to expansion of current breweries. And Joel has been with us from the very beginning. He is their sort of marketing and feasibility study business plan development guy. And this is his statement about what he sees as the need in today's industry. I should state that our program covers not only these elements, but we also spend time on things such as beer sales, distribution, social media, and how to use that effectively, because we all know that that's a key way to get the word out and keep your brand in front of consumers. So we have courses in that area as well. A typical participant in our program sees the team of people that they're working with, both students and our instructors, as really helping them in the process of going through that feasibility study and also in developing a business plan. Some of our participants are interested in gaining entry into the industry. They don't have any beverage experience or beer industry specific, but they're moving from finance, marketing, branding, different roles, and want to move into the industry and have had great success in doing this. Over the time that we've run our program now, over 4.5 years, 500 participants have gone through, and a number of breweries have started as a result of their planning. I'm not going to say it's all us, but we certainly contributed to that effort. When we set out, Alan Newman from Magic Hat and I got together, had lots of conversations about the industry. We only had about 4,000 breweries at that time. His contention was that a lot of people would enter the industry with a passion for beer, probably home brewing experience, but they didn't necessarily have any business experience or beverage industry experience. So we set out to create basically a business school for brewery startups, and that's what our program has been over the last 4+ years. Garth and Sean are on an advisory board for a new initiative of ours called Beer School, which is really short 4-week courses for people in the industry itself, professional development opportunities for people who are working in the craft sector. So we're launching a series of courses in that space as well. So in closing, big thanks to all of you and your comments, and I'm sorry you didn't have a chance to comment on all of your good posts here, but we can certainly do that in Facebook. And I'd like to really a special thanks to Sean and Garth for joining us.
Thanks. Good night.